Next up, we have Liam Curran. Finally, we've had some technical issues here in the background. So Liam is a senior technologist with Enterprise Ireland, and Liam has, I suppose, over 30 years experience in marine, water and wastewater sectors. So Enterprise Ireland and other agencies have supported and developed the Marine Ireland Industry Network, or MIN, a broad marine industry support umbrella. Working with Enterprise Ireland and colleagues, he also developed a specific Irish offshore wind energy cluster encompassing a total of 60 Irish SMEs. So Liam has extensive experience in the marine sector and the offshore, and he's here today to give us a brief overview of the opportunities and the funding mechanisms that Enterprise Ireland have. So Liam, céad míle fáilte. I hope you can share your screen okay there and that we no longer have any technical glitches.
Thanks, Cleana. Can you hear me there?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Hello, everybody, and apologies for being late to the party. We had numerous technical problems, but hopefully now we've been resolved. I don't actually have a presentation.
Very good.
Yeah. Which makes
Why
life
not? We're
hopefully...
all a little bit sick of presentations, so it'd be great to have a
Great. Then, yeah, and actually that was part of my logic is that rather than run through kind of endless slides telling the attendees about Enterprise Ireland support mechanisms, I thought what might be of more interest actually is to talk about enterprise agencies and kind of their culture and what we're looking for when it comes to actual applications. Kind of what works, what doesn't work. The kind of things you need to have in an application, and also the awareness you need to have around what the internal culture of that enterprise agency is, and that kind of drives everything then in terms of kind of what we want to see in an application. So let's talk initially about that big picture piece of what agencies are looking for. We all, regardless of whether it's Údarás or whether it's IDA or whether it's Leo or Enterprise Ireland, we look at the world through our particular lens, and we have slightly different views of the world. And when you're putting in an application to us or to any other agency for funding, you need to keep that culture in mind. So for us, the two key drivers that any application must address is jobs and exports. Those are the two key pieces for us. So when you're writing an application to us, you've got to have those two as the key points in your application. Now, we get lots of applications from companies who are developing a product or service and who are going to use the domestic market as a testing ground for that product or service. And that's fine. That's perfectly reasonable. But the expectation is there, and that particular product or service is being tested in domestic market for subsequent export. So that's the big picture. Know the culture of the agency that you're applying to. For us, it's jobs and exports. For Údarás, it would also be jobs and exports, but with the additional layer of being part of the Gaeltachta on top of that, and that expectation around, regional jobs, Gaeltachta areas for them. So that's a really key piece. If you're thinking of developing a product or service and you're going to apply to an enterprise agency, do keep this key piece in mind of what the broad picture of the culture of that agency is. Second thing I'd say is that have a good conversation initially before you make a formal application for support. And what I mean by that is that within the organization, there's going to be your point of contact. Have a good conversation with that person so that you understand where they're coming from and where their agency is coming from. Fill out your application, but keep it in draft format and send it to that person and say, look, this is what I'm going to put in my application. Is kind of the right language? Is it the right ambition? Is it with the thought process within your agency? So you need to do that piece. And that's really valuable because it helps the agency to understand where you're coming from, but also helps you understand where you fit within the system. So, to give you an example, I do technical assessments of high potential startups, and I'll mention high potential startups briefly. But in one recently, I had a company that were going to manufacture a product, and the consultant who was working on the project said, "Oh yeah, we're going to supply the domestic market, but with an ambition to subsequently export." And that's fine. I thought, okay, that's great. When I spoke to the actual promoter of the project, they said, "Oh no, we're only supplying domestic market with this product." Now, that's a big red flag, because you've got two people involved in the project here, one of whom is saying that we're going to export, and one of whom is saying they're not. So what's going on there? Where does that sit? And that, that's an example of something where you need to have joined up thinking in terms of your application. Let's talk very briefly about HPSU, high potential startup. So this is where a lot of companies or a lot of individuals on the call might be interested in kind of having an engagement with Enterprise Ireland. So in order to be a high potential startup, you've got to have an ambition to have €1 million sales within 3 years. You've got to have a minimum of 10 employees within 3 years. You need to be based in Ireland, and you need to be manufacturing internationally traded services. Those are the broad criteria for HPSU. And look, I'm not going to go into great detail, because there's lots of information on the web, or if you want to contact me subsequently, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you to help you guide you in terms of kind of what your thinking is on this. There's lots of information on our website where you can look up these criteria. But if you're putting in an application, what is Enterprise Ireland looking for? And I'm often asked to do technical assessments of high potential startup projects. And because people within the organization know that I cover off the marine sector, they'll often ask me, to have a look at marine projects. So I may well end up being your technical assessor if you do attempt to come in through the HPSU route. Do keep in mind, by the way, that an agency like Enterprise Ireland is trying not to say no, if you know what I mean. We are trying to say yes to projects, but they have to be good projects, and they have to fit with kind of what we want. And they have to fit in terms of the expertise of the management team. They have to fit in terms of the fund for the technology. And that thinking has evolved through a process of multiple applications into the HPSU, probably thousands over the last 10 years or so. So it's a process that has evolved to pick out the most successful companies, or potentially most successful companies, into the HPSU system. So what are we looking for when we talk about HPSU or a startup company coming into us? I have a set of questions, and I'm going to put them out to you. And I have multiple sub-questions, each individual big question. But the basic questions I ask a company when they come in with a new product or service, and they look, we want it under HPSU. First question is this: what's wrong with what's currently on the market? And this is critical, because you want to understand where is the niche, what is the thing that you as a company can provide that's going to get you into the market. So first question: what's wrong with what's currently on the market? Secondly, how is your new product or service going to solve that particular problem? How is it going to get around this issue? What is the opportunity? Next question is, what resources are required to develop this product or service? And when we talk about resources, we're talking about 3 types. We're talking about time, money, people. And the 3 are interconnected. So if you want to shorten the time where you're going to bring your product or service to the market, you need more people. And in order to have more people, you've got to invest more money in the short term. If you can afford to stretch that time to market, then you need less people and therefore potentially less money over time, over a short period of time. So that's potentially a benefit for some companies. So it's really important to have thought out your logical plan of going from technologists use a scale called a TRL scale, the technology readiness level. And it runs, and apologies if somebody's covered this already, but it runs from 0 to 9, where 0 or 1 is a concept in somebody's head. 9, on the other hand, is a commercially ready product, ready to go onto the market. In between are a set of logical steps. So you start off with a concept in somebody's head. The person takes that concept and on a piece of paper or computer or whatever, they work out, okay, can we actually manufacture this thing? Can we make it? Will it work? You then go to a rough and ready prototype, laboratory type situation, bench type situation. That's your TRL 2 or 3. You refine that design and you test it a little bit and you see, okay, you realize, okay, it's not quite right, but I need to change these things here to help make it more appropriate for the market. You then take that and you're now at kind of TRL 4 or 5, where you have a refined design and you're testing it, and you test it not in a real world, but in a simulated real world environment. So if we talk about marine technologies, for example, you might test a product at TRL 4 or 5 in a harbor type situation, a relatively benign marine environment where you can put a thing in the water, you can test it, is it marinized properly, is it waterproof, whatever it might be, but you haven't got it out in the open Atlantic, with the big waves and all the rest of it. And then you move through a kind of set of logical steps. You take it from that simulated real world environment. You realize there's still a few problems with it. You refine the design again, and you build it and test it, this time in a real world environment. And now you're putting something out in the marine sector. We're talking about putting something out in a real world scenario, out in the open ocean, seeing how it behaves. If it survives the Atlantic in January, it'll potentially survive anything. Now we're moving towards that key TRL 9, having a product which is ready to go to market. And that's the key piece, is to move through that thing. So when we talk about the resources you require, what we're looking for there is a map of how you're going to do those individual testing pieces until you have something that's ready to go to market. And you're looking at how, is the timeline realistic? And if it's realistic, then is the money realistic in terms of the number of people you're going to need to move it through that TRL scale? So that's a key piece for us. What we want to see is a project, and it doesn't have to be hugely complex or doesn't have to be computer generated. It can be a relatively simple process plan, but it does have to address those key steps, because that is the process by which a successful product or service eventually reaches the market. So we want to see that logical process of moving through these TRL scales. Okay, so resources, time, people, and money. Next question is your competitors. Who's out there? Who's developing something similar? Are they developing something similar? Is it very similar? Is it slightly similar? It's always a big red flag to me when somebody says, we don't have any competitors. Our technology offering is so unique that we have no competitors. That's always something that worries you, because there's always competitors. That's the nature of business. Next question is, what is the market? How big is it? Who's actually going to buy the product or service? Is the market in the UK? Is it in the EU? Is it in the US? Where is it? And who's going to buy the thing? How are you going to get into that market? What's your route to market? In other words, if you produce a product, is it going to go through a distributor? Are you going to sell directly to end customers? How is that going to work? And again, key question in terms of end market. Final question. And like I say, there's a multitude of sub-questions under these questions. But final question is this: who's actually going to put their hand in their pocket, and how much are they going to pay for your product? If you're bringing a new innovation to the market, and something exists already that costs, for sake of argument, 500 euros, and your product is going to cost 1,000 euros, it has to bring additional functionality, or it has to solve a key problem in order for the market to spend that additional 500 euros to pay for your product or service. So what is it bringing, and what value does it have as far as the market, the end market, is concerned? So those are some of the key issues that we would look at as technical assessors of new products or new services coming into the market that we're looking for support through the EI HPSU system. Don't forget, it's not just EI. You've got your local enterprise offices. You've got, you just heard from Fiona around Horizon Europe funding. You know, there's, depending on the company size, it fits in different agencies. So there's other funding mechanisms by which companies can be supported. But those criteria I've outlined to you there, they are the same criteria that are going to be used by the likes of the local enterprise office, or even IDA Ireland if you're large and you know you're going that route. So keep in mind those things. I'm happy to answer any questions people might have, and yeah, and feel free to get in contact with me. As Cliona said, we do have the Marine Ireland Industry Network, which now has over 200 companies in the directory there. If you are in the marine space in Ireland, we would encourage you to join the directory. It's a great way to get exposure. We get a lot of traffic to that site on an ongoing basis. We do have, as Cliona said, then we have our subset of the of the Marine Ireland Industry Network, which is the Gale Offshore Network, which is specifically offshore wind focused, and we have 85 companies in that, by the way, Cliona. We have lots of new companies have joined there. I'll give you an example actually of a company that's joined recently, and it's interesting that kind of adjacent companies in adjacent sectors are now beginning to look at this industry and think, right, well, I'm doing this thing here, but it's actually relevant for offshore wind. But a company we had in recently was a company called Torque Technologies in Limerick, and they make torque tools for basically tightening bolts and making sure they're tightened to the correct level. And they were basically, they had spent all their time in the automotive sector, and particularly in the US. That's kind of where their major market. But they realized that when you're putting together an offshore wind turbine, particularly the tower and the turbine system itself, there are literally thousands of bolts to be torqued and checked. And not only are you checking them when you put the thing up and you install it, but you've got to check them on an ongoing basis during the operation maintenance phase. So they realized that they had a product actually which was very relevant for the industry. So they are now part of our Gale Offshore Network. So I'd encourage any companies on the call who think they might have something which is, you know, it might not obviously be a part of offshore wind, but it might be in an adjacent sector. Do come and have a chat with us, and we'd be interested in having a conversation with you and seeing, you know, can we get you on board with that? But look, that's kind of my piece. I don't know if that's helpful to anybody, but happy to have a conversation subsequently.
Thank you, Liam. Really, really insightful, and it's great to get back to the fundamentals and stripping it back to, you know, what do state agencies or funding mechanisms require from enterprises, because I feel like that can be often lost in translation. One question I have for you is, I suppose, managing expectations of people applying for funding. What is the lead-in time roughly you have for various different funding mechanisms, whether that be through the feasibility or later stages? What would you normally advise?
Basically, come to us as early as possible, I suppose, is the advice. And do have that initial conversation with the key person internally. You know, in terms of applications and the time frame they take, it varies depending on the particular application mechanism. We are not good at, as you can imagine, with all public service applications, we are not good at turning those applications around quickly. So if you have a time critical piece, do make sure and get it into us as early as you possibly can. You know, if you're coming up to a funding round or something and you need to be able to say that Enterprise Ireland is supporting the company, do make sure you get in your application as quickly as possible or as soon as possible to us, because like I say, we try to turn that stuff around quickly, but public sector being a public sector, it takes the way it works, by the way, just kind of explain to people who may be a little confused as to how the whole system works, because we do occasionally get people who come in and say, I have a clever idea, send money. You know, it doesn't work like that. So what happens is that the person makes it, hopefully has this initial with their key contact, Enterprise Ireland or whatever agency you're applying to. You then submit your official application. It's reviewed to make sure that there isn't anything missing out of it. So, you know, it might be something as simple as company number or whatever it might be. But those key administrative bureaucratic pieces, they have to be filled in. It then is reviewed by the most relevant person internally. So, you know, it might be the person you had that initial conversation with. They go and have a look at it, see, does it make sense? See, is it logical? They'll then send out that application to a number of people internally. So they'll send it to the commercial people. They'll send it, you know, for technical assessment to somebody like myself. We then report back to that person and say, yes, this makes sense. You know, there is a logic in it. There is a mechanism. We do have on the technical side, we have a mechanism by which we look at projects and we kind of give them a score in terms of innovation and, you know, is it something new? Is it something relevant? Is it something the market's looking for? And we give that technical feedback to the key person. That person then writes up a funding application, which goes to a committee, right? And this committee, it supposedly wise and clever and all the rest of it. And a committee typically would have 6 to 8 people on it. They will review the application. The development advisor or the key person internally will sit across from that committee and explain to them why this project needs to be supported. And in fairness to the in our development advisors, they will fight very hard once they're in a room with that committee to get funding. Funding, you know, generally speaking, the development advisor will only bring an application that they're reasonably certain will get approval for funding. They won't bring something that has holes in it, because it just won't make it. It just won't get past that committee. The committee are clever. They'll spot the holes in it. So once that is done, then it's formally approved. The company gets what is called a letter of offer. If you do get a letter of offer, make sure you sign it and return it, because that's a bureaucratic glitch as well if that's not done. And at that point, finally, is the funding released, and the funding will inevitably come with conditions as well. So long story short, Cliona, basically keep in mind it's a long, convoluted process internally to get money. If you need money, make sure you get the application in as quickly as you possibly can.
Okay, that's great advice. Thank you very much, Liam. So I hope everybody had an enjoyable webinar today. So gur míle maithagaí for joining and éisteach lein. In case you missed the previous webinars that were focused really on the co-product utilization, they're available on the Pork the Mara YouTube channel. I'll let Maria come in and talk about our subsequent event that we had originally planned to have next week. I'll let her take it from there. But from me, gur míle maithagad agus míle buíochas a ríiste le bheith linn agus beagnálaigh sanna agaí.
Hi, thanks very much, Cliona, and thanks to everyone for participating today and over the course of the last number of webinar series that we've run. We were to have an event next Thursday, the 8th of December, but unfortunately that event has to be rescheduled. We're hoping that we can come back in 2023 bigger and better with a long list of interesting presenters with relevant information. So we hope to see you all in 2023. The date and time for that event, which is an in-person event, it won't be online, will be finalised before Christmas, and we hope to send a preliminary agenda before Christmas as well. So I'd encourage you, at the moment it's looking like a date in March, but that may change. So I won't give you a save the date yet, but just bear in mind that we will have our final event, and it will be an in-person event, and we hope to have an extended schedule of speakers. So that's it for me, and thanks again to everyone for their participation, and to Údarás and everyone, and Nolly Conna agus Slán.